Well, welcome to the Aviation Insurance Podcast. And today I'm excited to bring you a topic we've not yet discussed as it relates to aviation insurance. And most people may know and may not, but injuries to employees are excluded under most aviation policies, whether it's aircraft insurance, aviation commercial general liability, even property and business automobile type coverages. And that's because all 50 states have regulations that say that workers' compensation insurance is the sole remedy to injuries to employees. And so today, I wanted to bring on somebody who runs a company that specializes in workers' compensation. They have a division that's been doing that for many years, and several of our insurance companies are able to provide aviation workers' compensation insurance for pilots and all sorts of aviation employees, from ground crew, mechanics, even office staff. And so today, I'm excited to welcome Bennett Goldblum from Beacon Aviation Insurance, who's been specializing in workers' compensation along with other lines of insurance now for many years. So, Bennett, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Tim. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Good to be here.
Absolutely. Well, so just tell our audience a little bit about your high-level journey of getting into the industry to becoming the president of Beacon Aviation Insurance.
Sure. Well, I started off on the aviation side of things before getting onto the insurance side of things. And as a young kid, I had always wanted to be a pilot. And I got started actually in aviation through a neighbor who got me involved in the EA Young Eagles program. So worked at a local FBO and started flight training when I was about 13 years old. Got my private license in high school, and then right after that, got my instrument commercial CFI and started instructing while I was going to Embry-Riddle. So flew for several years professionally, and around the time of the Great Recession, 2008, I had the hours to start interviewing for the regionals, and had a lot of friends getting furloughed, and the airlines were kind of a mess at that time. And so I was looking for other career opportunities, maybe more on the business side, but that kept me involved in the aviation industry. So I had a good friend that was an insurance broker, suggested I check out aviation insurance. And I joined Beacon Aviation shortly after that. Beacon was pretty young in its infancy and getting going. And I started off in underwriting and grew with the company over the years, and had an opportunity when the former partners exited the organization and our new ownership came on. The Amenta Group, who's our parent company, asked me to take over as the president and leading the organization. So I've been doing that for, coming on 4 years now.
Wow. Yeah, it moves fast. And I know you're involved in the Aviation Insurance Association. And so a little trivia fun fact for our audience is, I teach now the course for the Aviation Insurance Association for core principles of aviation insurance that's required to get your certified aviation insurance professional. And a number of years back, you and I actually went through that course together and became certified aviation insurance professionals at the same time. So that's something, just a little fun fact for our audience. So, all right, well, I kind of introduced the idea of workers' compensation, but in general terms, can you tell our audience how workers' compensation is different from, other lines of aviation coverage like, aircraft hull liability or aviation commercial general liability?
Sure. Well, first of all, I would say workers' compensation is about the people that work in the industry. It's about protecting those people and making them whole in terms of being medically recovered if they're injured at work, and also providing some wage replacement if they miss time away from work because of their work injuries. So it's about the people working in the industry and taking care of them. From a more technical kind of aspect, it's what we call first party coverage, meaning the insured is making a claim against themselves for their employees. Aircraft hull liabilities, TGL, typically are third party coverages, and they're focused more on protecting the assets of the aircraft owner operator, or the business from third-party claims. So that's how I would describe the differences primarily.
Yeah, and workers' compensation comes in two parts, which the first is the actual injury to the employees, and the part two is the liability to employers, or employers' liability, as we call that, correct?
Correct. Yeah. An employer's liability, typically that's where you might see some third party claims coming into play, like you would on the aircraft and CGL side. Um, but you are correct. Yeah. Workers' compensation is actually the policy is two separate coverages. What we call part one of the policy is a workers' compensation. That's the medical coverage at 100% and the partial indemnity or wage replacement. And then part two is the employer's liability coverage.
Yeah, and I'm not sure everyone realizes it, but each state has their own set of workers' compensation regulations, right? And I'm sure that's got to be one of the biggest challenges. I mean, tell me about that. And from an underwriting perspective, you've got to make sure you're compliant with 50 different states' rules and regulations, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, each state has its own workers' compensation act that defines how the act is going to work in that state. And so, from an underwriting standpoint, we have to be aware of the different laws and rules in 50 different jurisdictions and how that is going to come into play if there is a claim, and how that may impact our underwriting decision based on where the different jurisdictions are for a given policyholder. So it's pretty unique. And as you pointed out earlier, workers' compensation is what we would call exclusive remedy. There's an exclusive remedy provision in the state acts where if somebody's injured and a suit is brought, if it's work related, the law is going to point towards the Workers' Compensation Act first and foremost. If it's available, it's going to be the exclusive remedy for recovery.
Yeah, and I think, we get into all these state regulations, and one interesting thing for aviation is that most aviation is not just in one home base. Sure, there are some MROs that everyone's in one place, but anyone with aviation operations, they may have multiple bases in different states. So you're looking at different, regulations, and then certain states have their own programs. But I think maybe it's important to touch on the fact that because of that, there are certain things that an operation must be insured for when operating in multiple states.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we look at that in kind of two different ways. Whether or not a policyholder has, let's say, an established location in a particular state, and if they have multiple established locations in different states, all of those states and locations should be reported on the policy and scheduled. But then there could also be temporary locations. For example, flight crews crossing state lines continuously throughout a day in some cases. And if an aircraft with the flight crew lands in one state to drop off passengers where the employer doesn't have a regular presence, does that constitute now that those employees are working in that state? And a lot of times that can be a little bit of a gray area. But it is possible that if those employees are injured, even while temporarily in that state, while the employer doesn't have a regular presence in that state, they could still potentially claim benefits in that state. So it's important in the aviation industry in particular that you ensure your workers' compensation policy is providing you with all other states' coverage. And that gives you temporary coverage while in other states that are not a part of your regular operations.
Yeah, that basically it's called the other states endorsement, isn't it? In
Uh,
simple terms.
Yeah, it was the all other states endorsement. There's not really, we don't use an endorsement now. It's just part of the declarations or information page of the work comp policy under, it would be item 3C, and it lists out all other states.
Okay, yeah, but some carriers or, may have a separate endorsement.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really important. So if you have, semi or permanent, employees in other states, it's important to report those on your workers' compensation applications. But the other thing that gets tricky, and there's a lot more with all the different state statutes, but there are 4 states that what we call monopolistic states, right? If you have employees permanently or reside
Yes.
in those working in those states, they have to purchase the state-specific program, correct?
Correct. Yes. The 4 monopolistic states, Washington State, Wyoming, North Dakota, Ohio, they have a state-run workers' compensation programs. They do not allow any private workers' compensation insurance in those states. You can only buy work comp through the state. Um, However, it's important to note that often those states do not provide employers' liability coverage, which is the other part of the policy we talked about earlier. So we would encourage employers that do have exposure in those 4 states to obtain an employer's liability coverage for the operations in those states. And we can do that, for example, by endorsement to their, I'll say, core workers' comp policy outside the policy outside of those states.
And that often goes by a stopgap coverage.
Stopgap employer's liability. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Well, that's just really good information, I think, for aviation business to understand, because so often there are A, operations in other states, and B, employees working and residing in other states, and so this comes up more and more, especially as remote work has become a bigger thing. Seeing needing the insurance in monopolistic states and stopgap coverage is becoming more and more of something we see every day, I think. So.
Yes, absolutely. And it's pretty standard coverage to ask for with the aviation underwriters, and pretty nominal premium for it. So definitely encouraged.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in general terms, then, what are you most excited about with the aviation workers' compensation insurance market today?
I think that there's a lot of opportunity to use technology better in insurance and underwriting in general, and uh, that excites me. With telematics, for example, being one thing to help reduce injuries or better track injuries, and ergonomics, for example, to assist with underwriting. That's one area that I think there's a lot of opportunity that's pretty exciting. And then with a lot of the emerging technologies in the aviation sector, you have now the VTOL aircraft. You have, I'll say, alternative power plants coming into the mainstream. And a lot of that is yet to be seen how that will take hold. But it's something that we have to stay abreast of in the insurance and underwriting arena, and I think that that's pretty exciting stuff to see coming out, and how that'll come play long term.
Absolutely. It's an exciting time in aviation insurance, and I love visiting about the new technologies and telematics and the CVTOL, advanced air mobility sector. And so a lot of people are thinking about insuring the actual, the vehicles themselves, the aircraft, but obviously the employees involved with it is a new challenge as well for those that are manned and operations on the ground, obviously. So, on the other side of the coin, what are some of the biggest challenges facing the aviation insurance workers' compensation market right now, or what challenges are the carriers facing in this line of the market?
Well, we've been facing downwards rate pressure for a number of years, and that's across the whole workers' compensation market, not just aviation specifically. But it's been downwards rate pressure for at least the last 6, 7, 8 years. And so we're kind of getting to a point now where the rates have, I think, neared bottom and starting to flatten out. But at the same time, we've been dealing with a lot of inflation over the last several years. Inflation, both with payroll and with medical inflation. And with medical inflation, obviously that has a direct impact to the cost of a workers' compensation claim because we will be paying more for injuries on the medical side. And then on the payroll side, there's been obviously we've seen a shortage in pilots in particular, also mechanics and other professionals in the aviation space, but in particular pilots over the last several years. The airlines post COVID had a boom and started hiring pretty significantly. And that put pressure on a lot of the GA operators and losing some of their talent to the airlines. And so there was pressure to increase wages, and payrolls have gone up to be more competitive and to retain talent on the GA side. So what that means for us is again, when we pay out claims, if it's a lost time claim, we're paying indemnity. More often than not, we're paying higher indemnity benefits now as well, up to the state maximum average weekly wage. So it's kind of a compounding effect there with inflation on the cost of medical, the cost of indemnity, and combined with the downwards rate pressure over several years. I think it'll be interesting to see how those results start to pan out over the coming years. Workers' compensation is a very long tail line. And when I say that, I mean it takes years for our loss results to fully develop and to know exactly what we're dealing with. So the claims that we have today, we might not know for 5 years or more exactly how that's actually going to look like on our balance sheet.
Yeah, so you're dealing with inflation, less premium basis and less premium. So it's always tougher to pay losses with less money and be profitable, which is obviously insurance needs profitability. So
yeah.
What's one thing that most people get wrong about workers' compensation insurance, or if there's one concept you could really convey to our audience that people should understand about it, what would that be?
One thing that comes up regularly is the use of independent and subcontractors, and whether or not independent or subcontractors should be considered employees for the purposes of being covered under workers' compensation. And the argument that we hear a lot is, well, they're 1099. I pay them at 1099. They're not an employee. And it's important to keep in mind that 1099 is tax law. It's not labor law. Two obviously totally different things. And the state Workers' Compensation Act, it's specific to each 50 of the 50 states, will determine whether or not somebody is considered an employee, whether or not they have a status as a 1099 independent contractor. So it's really important for business owners to talk with their attorneys and somebody that's qualified in labor law to understand the nuances of those laws. But we have seen time and again where somebody was called an independent contractor, got injured, lawyers got involved, and because of the exclusive remedy provision that we talked about earlier, it's going to come back to the workers' compensation policy. And if you were the one that paid that person or provided the tools or equipment or location, whatever, to that person, it's generally going to be construed as an employment relationship, and they could have benefits under your work comp policy.
And on that point, isn't it with many states that, if you've hired a true 1099 or independent contractor employee, that if that employee doesn't have their own workers' compensation coverage, it falls upon the company employing them?
Correct. Yeah. So it's we really encourage the policyholders to get certificates of insurance from any independent contractors, subcontractors that they hire, showing that they do have workers' compensation insurance. That way, you're protected from them making a claim against your policy.
Yeah, that's really good. So thinking of safety and reducing, workers' injuries, what are some of the best tools or or resources you guys have noticed or seen available in the industry, whether that's SMS, human factors training, or something else that you feel would best help aviation operations improve safety and reduce employee injuries?
There are a lot of different tools available that can help to address what we would call like physical hazards, and to control safety that way. But I always like to have a conversation around culture, safety culture. I think that is hugely important in an organization. A lot of times, safety policies, programs like SMS are developed, and it's a binder that sits on a shelf and collects dust. And while it's good to have that kind of document, you want it to be a living, breathing thing in the organization. And that starts at the top. And, you think about perhaps a CEO, president of a company walking through a hangar, and they see something that looks out of place or it's unsafe. If they stop, take the time to correct it, what kind of message does that send to everyone else in the hangar that's working and observing that? It shows that leadership cares that this is important, and it should be important to us too. So making safety a part of the organizational culture has huge effects on the safety outcomes for the organization.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Well, as we want to close our time here and respect your time, are there any questions I should have asked you but didn't, or do you just have any closing thoughts to share on this?
I don't have anything else. I just thank you for the opportunity to speak with you and your audience. And, this is a very exciting industry. I'm glad to be a part of it. And thanks for your time.
Absolutely. Well, again, this is workers' compensation is a very important part of the aviation industry, and it's one not as many people spend as much time on, but there's a lot to it. And so we're really blessed to have experts like yourselves who specialize in this, that partner with our brokerages and other organizations to bring, affordable and unique programs in aviation insurance to the aviation industry and communities. So, Bennett, thank you to you for your time and sharing this great information with our audience, and for being a just fantastic guest.
Thanks, Tim.
All right, well, that's all for this episode. Join us again next time as we continue navigating the waypoints in aviation insurance. Until then, enjoy clear skies and unlimited visibility.
Thanks for listening to the Aviation Insurance Podcast. If you found this episode of value, please share it with someone who would benefit from this information. Don't forget to subscribe in your podcast player so you don't miss any new episodes, and to help our show have more impact. This episode is brought to you by Aris Insurance Solutions, your flight plan for navigating the turbulence of aviation insurance. For more information, visit arisinsurance.com. That is www.aerisinsurance.com. Disclaimer: these episodes are for educational purposes only, and due to the changing regulatory and legal nature of the business, some information may change over time. Having a well-educated and experienced aviation insurance broker on your team is an absolute requirement to success in business and for managing your aircraft and aviation business risks.